Hey everybody, this is my video response to Mark GlassOrchirdAftermath's request for our opinions on what album defines the 60s. At first I was kind of stumped and I wasn't quite sure what to do, and the obvious and sort of lazy thing to do, I guess, would be to fall into the trap of picking which album you think is the best of the 60s, and that's not really I don't think what he was going for. Music's always been, about reflecting society in some way, and obviously I would say that the 60s are probably the one era, or one decade, where the music was so linked with culture of its time. I mean, I think now, like the last 10 years or so, music's been pretty disconnected from the political or cultural movements that we've gone through, for the most part. So that's sort of a long-winded way about how I decided to choose. So when I think of the 60s, it's sort of this dichotomy between the sort of idealism, the hippie idealism of free love and peace, no war, and all that stuff. And then there's really the reality, or at least the other half of that reality, and that was all the turmoil that was going on in the 60s, of course, with the Vietnam War and civil rights and et cetera, et cetera. So I tried to think about what would marry the two, but I don't know if this exactly marries the two. I think it's a little bit more on the side of the sort of negative or downside of what was going on in the 60s. So without further ado, I picked Forever Changes by Love. So the reason why I picked this is that this is sort of an iconic release of the time, and maybe you could sort of draw a parallel to the decade that on the surface it seems indicative of the idealism of the time. The band's called Love. If you don't know anything about the band, you see Love and you see the trippy 60s artwork, and you see the guys, in their sort of 60s look and stuff. And of course, if you look at Arthur Lee, he's the one that kind of looks the most sinister, while everybody else is kind of I'm sorry, Mark Nichols, I think it is, or Mike Nichols. Oh, Brian. Oh, God, what am I doing? John Eccles was a guitar player. I'm completely screwing up the names. The other main guy was Brian McLean. Sorry about that. He was actually the one who wrote Alone Again, and a few other ones on here. Old Man. So he's kind of overlooked because, Arthur Lee's always the one that's talked about. Anyway, I'm kind of meandering here. So sense that Arthur Lee had dealt with some mental issues and paranoia and that sort of thing, and so he kind of looked down upon the culture he saw in his surroundings, which was LA, and so he was a bit more of a cynic as opposed to being trapped into the glitz of Hollywood and the summer of love mentality. So I figured maybe I'd take out a couple of lyrical selections. I'm horrible at remembering lyrics myself, so I have to actually read them. I've kind of casually been reading this 33 1/3 book on Forever Changes. If you're not familiar with the series, these are pretty cool. The one downside is that they can tend to be a bit on the sort of stuffy, on the stuffy academic side. And this is, the ones I've gone through, this one's definitely, it's a bit too academic for me. It reads too much like a PhD thesis than anything, because the author really starts making parallels between Arthur Lee and his subject matter and the Gnostic Christians and so on and so forth. And I just think it's a little bit over analytical. But anyway, I figured I'd give you some of the lyrics and a quote here from Arthur Lee himself to kind of give you an idea of how it sort of mixes in a little bit more of the sort of negative stuff that was involved in the 60s, as opposed to just the happy and free love stuff. I guess he was interviewed by someone, and most hippies at the time were about living in the time, living in the moment, and being happy, and etc., etc. And here Arthur Lee was really sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum. Even though he's been known to kind of reference himself as being the first, maybe the first hippie, and certainly the first black hippie. But he doesn't act like a hippie at all. So anyway, back to what I was saying. I mean, hippies generally sort of are sort of the free love and being happy and in the moment. And Arthur Lee was convinced, and this is I'm sure it has to do with his mental state, was convinced that he was going to die any day at the time when he was doing these songs. The quote here is, he says, "By Forever Changes, when I did that album, I thought I was going to die at that particular time. So those were my last words." That he recalled that, I guess, the next year. Oh no, well, it was later he did the interview. So yeah, it's a pretty dire perspective that he took while he was writing these songs. I figured I'd take some of these excerpts from some of the lyrics. This first one, this one's from The Daily Planet, which is, I think, the 4th track. The lyric reads, "In the morning we arise and start the day the same old way as yesterday, the day before, and for it all, it's just a day like all the rest. So do your best with chewing gum, and it's oh so repetitious, waiting on the sun." So just dealing with the monotony of everyday life. Considering that he was in LA, the most one of the most thriving music scenes in the mid to late 60s, and it was Hollywood, and his perspective was just sort of that it was day-to-day routine and boring and dull. One more. This one's from Your Mind and We Belong Together, which is actually a track that wasn't on the original release. It's on the CD reissue. I think it came out in 2001. Yeah. Goes, "So many people, they just seem to clutter up my mind, and if it's mine, throw it away. Throw it again, once for my girlfriend. So many voices, don't let them stop between my ears. But it appears that they are, though they are wrong, 10,000 strong. I'm locking my heart in the closet. I don't need anyone. Oh no, no. You'll find me behind the door." Which here, the author probably rightly thinks that it was a reference to this closet that they lived in, this sort of castle where the movie The Trip was filmed, and apparently there was a closet that he sort of holed himself in at times, and so that, it's probably a reference to that. So I don't know how I'm going to conclude this, but basically speaking, I just wanted to pick this album because I felt it kind of countered some of the idealism of the 60s, while still being a beautiful album in its own right. It's a little bit more on the darker side, and probably really one of the more dark albums of that time. And so I just figured, why not love Forever Changes? Anyway, I don't know what else to say. So, hope you liked it.